Hi, everyone. Often when we hear the name of Elizabeth the Wonderworker, we think of the wonderful Russian Grand Duchess who reposed really as a martyr at the beginning of the 20th century. She is truly a phenomenal saint, one of the most phenomenal of the last 200 years, and if you don't know her life, I would urge you to investigate it because it's very, very profitable from many, many different angles. But this time, we reflect on another Elizabeth the Wonderworker, this one commemorated on April 24th, and is someone who lived many, many years before the aforementioned Grand Duchess. In fact, scholars are a little bit uncertain about when she lived. Some of them say from the 6th to 9th century, which seems like a great span of time. I guess they're trying to cover their bases. But some things in her life would indicate that she was probably sometime in the 5th century. At any rate, she was from Heraclea, which was a very prosperous town about 50, 60 miles west of Constantinople, and had two very pious parents who were devoted to God in many, many ways and were also quite wealthy. They had a relatively easy life. But the one thing they didn't have was a child, and in fact, 16 years into their marriage, they were still struggling and hoping for the birth of a child, but nothing had happened. Well, as it happened this one particular year, the local most dominant saint, I guess you could say, of the area, Saint Glyceria, who is commemorated by the church on May 13th, well, she enjoyed a great festival in her honor every year, where people would celebrate and pray in all-night vigils for the week before, and then at the end of the week or whenever her feast day fell, they would have the Divine Liturgy. So it was a wonderful time for all concerned in this particular area. So this year, Elizabeth's parents participated in this vigil of prayer, and in fact, one night they were so tired they fell asleep on the floor of the church in the midst of all this, trying to get a bit of a nap before the celebrations would continue the next morning. And St. Glyceria herself appeared to Elizabeth's father and said basically, "Why are you honoring me with your request for a child? You should be asking God directly." But, she said, if you do certain things, if you will increase your devotion to God, be even more generous to the poor, these sorts of things, then God indeed will grant you a child, and it will be a daughter, and you will call her name Elizabeth. Well, Elizabeth's father was thrilled to hear this, and in fact, the next day, when speaking with his wife, he found out that Elizabeth's mother had had the exact same vision. And so they were very happy about this, and almost immediately her mother conceived and gave birth to Elizabeth. Elizabeth was raised in great piety. She was a very, very pious girl, loved the things of the church, and even at the age of 3, she began studying churchly texts and especially the Gospels and the Epistles, and had quite a good grasp of all these things. Well, as time went on, unfortunately around the age of 12, her mother reposed. And at that point, the father, not really understanding what he should do, suggested that she marry. Yes, they did marry at that age way back when. But Elizabeth had other things in mind, and she was not keen on the idea. She felt that Christ was her bridegroom, and she wanted to spend all her time with him. And so she delayed and delayed and delayed. And 3 years went by, and finally her father reposed as well. Now this left Elizabeth with a great deal of money. And so what she finally decided to do was to give all of this money away. She freed all of the manservants and maidservants that they had, distributed much money to the poor, and gave everything away, all of her family's fortune, and then went to the city of Constantinople, to the convent there of the great martyr George, where it happened her father's sister was the abbess. And so Elizabeth was there for a few years, and then after that, the abbess proposed, but not before naming Elizabeth as her successor. So even at this very, very young age, after having been clothed in the great schema and living an intense spiritual life, which included going around barefoot all of the time, rarely eating at all, spending day and night in prayer and in church, well, now she was faced with the whole new task of directing souls underneath her. And by all accounts, she was a wonderful, wonderful directress. She is someone that was very friendly, that was very easy to approach, that always had words of wisdom for everyone. This was something that the nuns there just adored in her. And so she was very successful, so much so that she even came to the attention of the emperor. Now, the emperor had appointed her father as a judge, so he was well familiar with that family. But as it turns out, Elizabeth, in wanting so much to spend all of her time with the Lord, resisted any kind of efforts to get involved in politics or anything like this, and continued on her way and growing closer and closer to Christ every single day. Well, there were some other things that happened with Elizabeth, because one particular man came to her with his daughter who had an issue of blood, was hemorrhaging for a long, long time. And Elizabeth asked the man and said, and this is a very interesting point, said, if you will do these things, if you will be more generous to the poor and spend more of your time in church and get to know our Lord better, then indeed he will cure your daughter. This is interesting because she was saying that basically it was up to this man as to whether or not his daughter would be cured. Well, she took oil from the lampada before the icon of the great martyr George and anointed the daughter, and sure enough, she became free of her illness. Another time, someone came with a blind person who had been blind from birth. And Elizabeth basically said the same thing and said, look, the Lord certainly will heal you. And she again took the oil from the oil lamp of the great martyr George and anointed this person, and within 7 days they had restored sight. So many of these things happened. She was in contact with one of the great saints, Daniel the Stylite, who was in Constantinople at that time. And in fact, after talking with him, she had a premonition that there was going to be a great fire in the city. And sure enough, in the mid-400s in Constantinople, there was a great fire that covered most of the city, and it is said that many, many more people would have died had not Daniel and Elizabeth warned the authorities of this. And because of this, the emperor was so grateful, he gave her some additional large property on which to establish an even bigger monastic house. Well, time went on, and there's many, many stories about Elizabeth. She's not called the Wonderworker for nothing. In fact, there used to be a big book just full of the incidences in her life of cures and people coming to Christ, many, many things. But unfortunately, that book has been lost to us today. But what I will say is that towards the end of her life, she went back to Heraclea to visit the place that she had grown up in. And she was also visited by a vision of Saint Glyceria once again, who told her that in a certain number of days she would repose and go to the Lord, and that she should go back to her monastery in Constantinople and prepare for this. Well, Elizabeth did this, and about the 6th hour on the day before she died, she had a high fever, and she suffered through the night. But then the next morning, on the 9th hour, on the 3rd hour, about 9 o'clock, she reposed in the Lord peacefully, according to what St. Glyceria had told her. So let's not forget the other Elizabeth, if you will, a great saint who, even to this day, miracles happen at the site of her rest and in that whole area of Heraclea, which is even still thriving today. The saints are mighty in God. God works his wonders through them and wills that it be so. And so all of us should pay attention to these wondrous saints who now intercede nonstop before the throne of the Lord for all of us.